Hey everyone, thanks for tuning this episode of Nick Egan Times. On this episode, we have a sensational guest. We have the incredibly creative and visionary Stacey Reiss. Stacey is an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker whose work is shaping culture. Stacey is the head of film at Wavelength, where Stacey oversees both scripted and unscripted projects at a pivotal moment as Hollywood redefines how stories are being told. Stacey has produced documentary features, narrative films, and series for platforms including Netflix, HBO, Sony Pictures Classics, and Sundance. Stacey's work challenges power, reframes history, and elevates voices too often left out of the conversation. Welcome to the visionary Stacey, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. All right, let's jump straight into it. Take us back. Tell us about how your life was growing up, your family, and everything relating to that.
Sure. I grew up in Los Angeles. My family's not in the business. That's an often asked question when I say I'm from Los Angeles. I had no connections or inroads into the film business, but I was surrounded by it and was always really interested in storytelling and started off my career initially as a journalist. And I was interested in being a journalist in broadcast news.
Amazing. And what was the first story that made you realize storytelling could shape how people see the world?
That's a good question. When I grew up in Los Angeles, my best friend's mother worked in the news business. She worked for CBS News, and she was Connie Chung's producer. And so I spent a lot of time at their home, and I loved hearing her stories about all the different people that Connie would interview and they would have on on their show. And so that was really my first exposure to storytelling and the power of news and the power of, a very strong female reporter who was, making changes at the time.
Amazing. All right, and tell me about Wavelength. How has the role been, and how are you enjoying it? And I guess if you could just elaborate on specifically what you do for people that might not understand, being the head of film.
Sure. I think a lot of people don't understand what a producer is. That's something that I'm always trying to explain to people. And I've spent my career as a producer, both in TV and film. And what I always say is the producer is the person who is often along the ride from the very, very beginning, the initial idea for a story when you're developing it into a project, all the way until the project's delivered to the distributor or the network or the streamer. And you touch every single department and every single part of the process and really serve as, a creative partner to the director. And as head of film, which is, my new role at Wavelength, I joined in the fall, which I love and I'm so excited about. I'm overseeing our slate of projects, both in the narrative space and in the nonfiction space. And, using the same skills as a producer, an eye for what are good stories, how to tell them, and how to support the teams, both from a creative point of view and from a financial point of view.
Great. Can you share a bit about your professional journey and what led you to your current role as head of film at Wavelength?
Yeah, sure. I always say to people that my career has kind of zigged and zagged, and I'm on, maybe the third act of a different type of work that I do now, but all of it to me really connects because it's all about storytelling. So, like I said, I started off my career in news. I came to New York in my 20s and worked for NBC News for a decade. I worked as a producer for CNBC. I worked as a producer for Dateline NBC, and I produced news specials. And I really loved that form of storytelling, and really wanted to, sort of expand it. I like the long form storytelling, the news documentaries, and I had an opportunity. Someone came to me with a project, and it was the first documentary that I made called "I Knew It Was You." It's about the actor John Cazale, who plays Fredo in the Godfather movies. And Richard Shepard, the director, and I were set up on a work blind date, and we, immediately hit it off. And I liked the creative, and I sort of used that as the first project to leave and start making my way in the feature documentary world. That was one of those projects that was, had fairy dust around it. We, made the film, interviewed all of my film heroes, including Meryl Streep and Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. And the film got into Sundance, and HBO acquired the project. So it's one of those projects that, you realize that was my first time. That doesn't happen on every project, but that was the first one. And, after that, I independently produced a number of documentaries, series, and narrative films, and worked with Wavelength on a project that came out in 2020 the absolute worst year to have a movie come out
Mhm.
because of COVID. That film was called Spaceship Earth, and it was also at Sundance. It was directed by Matt Wolf, who recently did the Pee Wee Herman documentary. And Wavelength was one of the investors in that project. And so that's how I met the team at Wavelength, and we have stayed in touch since, and it resulted in this incredible job that I have now.
Wow, that's a fascinating answer and story. Thanks for sharing. All right. In your role
Sure.
overseeing in your role overseeing both scripted and unscripted projects, what excites you most about the kinds of stories at Wavelength that you're telling right now?
Well, if you look at Wavelength's been involved in over 100 films, and they're all the best of storytelling. I mean, they have incredible taste. That's what made me want to join this team. They were part of Won't You Be My Neighbor, the Mr. Rogers documentary. They were part of the documentary about A Down the House before anyone knew who AOC was. Most recently, they were producers on Rather about Dan Rather. I mean, these are projects with incredible access, incredible directors, great storytelling, and films that matter, which is important to me. So I think that those are the types of stories I want to continue to tell. And so I feel like my job is to not mess it up. I want to keep telling the great stories Wavelength has been telling. And what's exciting to me is also coming up with stories and ways to make films that kind of break the mold. I'm always looking for new ways to tell stories, both from a creative point of view, but also new ways to get stories out there. Not everything has to be a 90-minute feature film. There's so many other ways to get projects out there. And that's one of the things that I'm looking really carefully at right now.
Wow, that's extraordinary. All right, your work spans documentary and narrative filmmaking. How do these two approaches inform each other in your creative process?
It's interesting because I think storytelling is storytelling. So we know what a good story is. Some stories lend itself to, a 5-minute news piece or a news magazine segment, and some stories lend themselves to a feature film. If there's incredible archival material, a documentary. And sometimes those films should be scripted films because the best way to tell that film is to use a scripted approach. So to me, it's about how is the best way to tell the story and and the best way to go about it. And I'll give an example. I produced the series for Netflix, the Andy Warhol Diaries, and that was a hybrid project where we had incredible access to the Andy Warhol archives, through his films and archive, and to the museum. And initially, and then we also had these incredible sort of reenactments of major scenes in Andy Warhol's life. And initially, it was like more of a hybrid type project where the scripted and the unscripted scenes were kind of equally weighted. But as we got more and more into making the project, we realized that so much of his life was documented. And so we really included much more of the archival material than we did of the scripted material because we were able to illustrate that. So I think when I'm approaching projects, I'm always looking at that. Like, what is the best way to tell the story? What are the tools we have to tell it? And how is it going to be most powerful?
Wow, that's really captivating. All right, you've collaborated with major platforms like Netflix and HBO, as well as the independent film community. What have you learned from working across different spaces in the industry?
I think that, the most important thing is being collaborative and knowing that this business is all about relationships. And I have made work, a number of projects with Netflix, a number of projects with HBO, and just wanting to make quality work, nurture those relationships, build a community, um, be respectful. I always feel like everyone has good notes, and being open to anyone on the team can give notes. Making work is collaborative. And I feel like the more collaborative that you can be, the better off you are in your career. And it's really about creating a sustainable career because you want to work with people over and over again. And I think, especially early stage filmmakers, it's important to remind them this isn't like a one and done. If you want to be in this business, you want to make this project be excellent, but you want to continue to use these people that you're working with as, stepping stones to other projects.
That's really great insights. Thank you for sharing that. Um, what do you want your legacy to be?
My legacy. I mean, I think that I have always wanted to use my platform and my like microphone, so to speak, to support people that don't have that access, who don't, maybe have a voice or their voice isn't amplified as much. And so I'm always looking for projects where I can like help lift up other stories. I think that's really important. I've worked with so many different types of people that have collaborated in film projects. Everyone from a young nomadic woman in Mongolia on the Eagle Huntress. I produced a film for HBO called It's a Hard Truth that men who are incarcerated were the co-directors telling their own stories about what that experience is like to be imprisoned for life. And so I think it's really important to not think that there's only one type of storyteller. To me, there's so many different people telling their story, and I think it's really important to hear those stories directly from those people.
Yeah, definitely. All right, looking ahead, what themes or perspectives are you most excited about to explore in your upcoming work?
I'm really interested in, two different things. On the commercial side of things, someone posed a question to me in a meeting last year right before Thanksgiving, and they said, "What's a movie that I can watch with my whole family? I'm spending Thanksgiving with young kids and my parents and grandparents." And I really had a hard time coming up with something that would fit that mold. I feel like things are being created right now that are like for very specific audiences, but not things that you can sit down and watch as a family. And, I'm really interested in creating projects that can fit into that on an independent level. So that's one thing that I'm really looking for. Films like Thelma or Theater Camp or, even Challengers is something that I was thinking I would have loved to have been part of. But then in terms of themes that I'm interested in, we're in, a very divided world right now. And so I'm really interested in what are projects that will get people to step outside of their own shoes and think about what it's like on the other side of the aisle. And I don't mean political stories. I just mean that movie theaters and films are ways that people can come together and experience something together. And in many places, that's like the community gathering space. So, how do we make projects that get people that might not agree on things outside the movies to come together and have conversations and see each other in other people's shoes?
Wow, that's tremendous. All right, tell me, the Netflix market has clearly changed. From where you sit and your experience, what has actually changed and what is going to replace it or what is replacing it?
I wish I knew because that is the million-dollar question right now is, what is the future and how are things changing in this space? I think the exciting thing for me is that there are in some ways less barriers to entry in filmmaking than there ever have been. People are doing self-distribution, they're breaking the mold in that, in those models. In some ways, like I always say to people, especially in the nonfiction space, there's actually more places for documentaries than there ever have been. When I was coming up, there was PBS and HBO, and that was it. And if they didn't want to release your film, good luck. I don't know what you were going to do. There was no such thing as YouTube as a way to release your work. So, now there's so many different streamers and networks and YouTube and places that people can release work, and you can make work with phones. Everyone has one, and it's a way to, kind of break into this business. So I think I just came from a meeting where we were talking about this, this very concept and like what are ways to tell stories that haven't been told before. And I think we're all looking at it and what that looks like. So I'm optimistic about the future. I think that the more people that want to get involved in filmmaking, there's a way to do it.
Wow, that's great insights. Thank you for sharing that again. Okay, what is your favorite part of working in Hollywood?
Well, let me point out that I work in Brooklyn and not Hollywood.
Oh, okay.
But no, Wavelength is based in Brooklyn, in Los Angeles, and in London. I'm based in New York, which I really like because the film community here is it's a little bit smaller and it has sort of a different makeup to it. It's very indie. And a lot, it's just a different vibe. I feel like Hollywood is much more in the studio space. And but what I like is that there's always new voices. And if you look at, we just came out of Sundance and I went to films that were made by first-time directors that had never made anything before, and the films were incredibly moving. And I love that every year there's sort of this new class of directors and creatives and people that come up in this business. And to me, that's very exciting.
Amazing. What do you love most about your job and the industry?
I mean, I love telling stories. I love that every day is different. I love that I get to immerse myself in a project and build a team of people and work with those people, and then the project finishes and then I get to do it all over again in a different subject matter in a different space. So it's just like constantly evolving and changing. I love being able to help other people bring their projects to life. And I also really like mentoring young people who are coming up in this business. I think it's really important to, mentor younger creatives and younger filmmakers. And I know that there were people that were really important to me as I came up in the business. And I think that we sort of lost sight of that a little bit during COVID. It's hard to mentor people over Zoom, but as people are coming together, making work together, I think it's really exciting to try to help other people out.
Terrific. What's something the general public don't realize about working behind the scenes in film?
It's not that glamorous. I think people see the premieres and they see the red carpet photos and they see the film on screen, and what they're not seeing is all the really like late nights that went into making that happen. Um, everyone's like, "Oh, you're a producer, that's so cool." And it is, and I love what I do, but being a producer also means carrying the apple boxes on a shoot, or, making sure that all the deals are done late at night before you start shooting the next day. I think that there's so much that goes into it that people don't see. And I think that's the goal because, it's a magical world and you want people to watch these movies and not see all the fingerprints all over them. But every single film has the fingerprints of all the people that worked on it. And it's so important when you look at all those credits at the end of a movie to remember that every single one of those people had a role in bringing that project to life.
Wonderful. How do you know when a story is finished?
Well, sometimes, frankly, you just run out of money and it has to be finished. And, and I think with a documentary, most of the time I like to go into the projects and you think you have an idea of what the ending is. I think it's really good to have, an outline for how you want to tell a story. But sometimes, things change and things shift and what you think is the ending isn't the ending. So I also think it's important to be nimble and flexible in your storytelling and in your process. And if you need more time in the edit, or if you need to go get another interview, or if you sell a project to Netflix and they want to make changes, that you're open to all of those different things.
Great. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Play to your strengths, meaning look for the strongest part of the story and focus on that. And if there are things that aren't working, don't get caught up in those.
Cool. What's the best piece of advice you would give a young Stacey? Similar situation growing up, and in the same situation.
I think that I tell people all the time this isn't an easy business, but it's a very satisfying business. You have to be someone that's open to like the zigs and zags of a career. It's not something where you get one job and then you get promoted and then you get promoted and there's a trajectory. So I'm always telling people like be patient, make work. You have to really, really want to do this. This is not something for someone that's like, oh, it would be cool to make films. It's something that it requires a lot of hard work and dedication and just making sure that that's something that you're open to. I've definitely missed family holidays because I've been on shoots in all over the world. And so whenever I meet with young people, I'm sort of trying to like pressure test, like, okay, how important is it to you to be in this business? Because again, it's really hard work and it's completely satisfying and I love it, but you really have to want to do it.
So it's not for the faint-hearted. Um,
It is
what?
not for the no.
Definitely. What have been some pinch me moments when you look back at your illustrious career? What are some of the pinch me moments that really stand out for you?
I went to Mongolia to film with the young woman that I spoke about earlier. Her name's Ashil Pan in the film The Eagle Huntress. Sony Classics acquired that film 10 years ago at Sundance, and we brought her and her family to Sundance to be there for the premiere. And, they had never traveled to the United States before, and being able to watch them experience the film and the reception to it was, one of the most incredible moments in my career.
Explosive. What has been the most challenging situation in your career, and how did you handle it?
The most challenging situation in my career. Um, that's a good question. I know, when I left NBC and I'd worked there for 10 years, and the beauty about working at a place like NBC is you could make projects and there was just, distribution in place. You would pitch something, and if they bought the idea, then there was financing, there was distribution, you made your work, you did your project. It wasn't, there weren't some of the challenges that come with being an independent producer. And when I left NBC and went out on my own, I really remember feeling like, is anyone going to return my phone call anymore? I don't have this peacock on my business card. I don't know if anyone knows who Stacey Reiss is. And there was definitely a period in there where it took time to sort of get myself set up and start my own company and get my own projects. And it was definitely a challenging moment where I thought, oh, have I made the right decision? I wanted to bet on myself. I knew that I could do the work, but was it going to happen? And I think that that was definitely a challenging moment. I thought when I had that first film I mentioned to you, I knew it was you at Sundance, that all of a sudden the projects would come in. Okay, here I am. I have a film at Sundance. It's on HBO. It has all these incredible people in it. And what I realized is you always have to make your own, your own connections. You have to make your own work. And people weren't like calling me off the hook. And that was definitely, an eye opener that you're kind of only as good as your last project in this business. And it's always about pushing forward the next one. And now, like a decade later and, dozens of projects later, I realize that. But in those early days, I didn't really realize that.
Well, thanks for sharing. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
My fan club is my family, and my father has been to every single one of my Sundance premieres. He was just there last week when Wavelength was premiering Soul Patrol, and that is really meaningful to me. And when he likes one of my films, it means a lot to me. And also sometimes he doesn't really understand, why we're making a film or what the story is behind it. But I love that he's open to being there and being part of those. The other big compliment I got is from one of my sons. I have two kids in college right now, and I have a film coming out on Netflix about Noah Kahan, the musician. It was just announced this week, and it's going to be out South by Southwest. And my son watched it, and he was like, "This is the best film you've ever made." And having, my kids be proud of me, especially because I've missed out on a lot of things when I have been away, is to me the biggest compliment.
Well, that's incredible. Well done. Congratulations. Um, what keeps
Thank
you
you.
humble?
Those same kids keep you humble because no matter how much I try to impress them, at the end of the day, I'm still their parent. I'm still, making meals, helping them with things. I think that this business is, it's like I said, it's hard. And the fact that it's hard keeps you humble. You want to keep making work. You want to keep, no matter how many projects you make, you never know when your last project's going to be. And in some ways, that's good and it keeps you humble. I have so many other films I want to make, but I'm also aware that it's such a privilege to be able to tell stories and such a privilege to be able to make work. And I don't take for granted when that's going to happen.
Well, there you go. You're very humble now. You're very modest. If you were 18
Thank you.
again and you could change anything, it could be personally or professionally, what would you change?
I'm someone who doesn't have a lot of regrets, so I'm not sure I would go back and really change anything. There are a couple of things I didn't, take advantage of, so to speak. I made a film many years ago and we were filming in Afghanistan, and I decided to stay behind because I had young kids at the time. And it was one of the only times that I've done that and not gone and, been on the shoot and on set. And sometimes I look back on that, and even though I know that was such a kind of smart decision as a human being, there's a part of me that wished I had gone on that shoot. But overall, I really honestly feel like I've been incredibly lucky, and I don't have a lot of regrets.
Wonderful. Stacey, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and making time. I do appreciate it. It's incredible your career and everything you're doing, and I wish you nothing but the best in the future.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.